Let's go ahead now and take a look at our liquidity. In terms of our liquidity, the first ratio we're going to take a look at is our current ratio. Our current ratio, recall, was our current assets divided by our current liabilities. In 1988, we had $1.46 in current assets for every dollar in current liabilities, and that has increased to 2.14. So the trend, it's increased. We have more current assets relative to current liabilities, so it has gotten better, but we're still, notice what, worse than the industry average. Our industry average, our competitors have $3 in current assets for every dollar in current liabilities, while we only have $2.14. So we're still worse than the industry average. Next, let's look at our acid test, or quick ratio, and that was our current assets excluding inventory. So it was current assets minus inventory, that whole quantity divided by current liabilities. Our acid test was a 0.7 we had in 1988. It's now increased to 1.12. So it's increased, which is a good sign. It's gotten better, but notice we are what? Still worse than the industry average of 1.9. Cash flow liquidity. We were at negative 0.43. We're now at negative 0.24. We've got pretty lousy cash flow liquidity. And recall, we had negative operating cash flows, and that's why we've got a negative cash flow liquidity. So while our cash flow liquidity has increased, and I guess we would say it's better, it's still laughable and far, far worse than the industry average. Our cash flow margin, we were losing 7 cents from every dollar we generated in sales. In other words, remember, it cost us 107 in cash to generate $1 in cash. Not a good sign, and we're now at negative 4.5. So I guess from a technical perspective, we would say it has increased and we have gotten better, but the fact that it's negative is absolutely horrible, and we are still worse than the industry average. The industry on average is generating 9 cents in cash on every dollar in sales, while we're losing cash on every dollar in sales. Day sales in cash. We have decreased from 6.8 to 1.33. So our day sales in cash has decreased, and from a liquidity perspective, that's worse. Remember, from an efficiency perspective, it was better, but from a liquidity perspective, it's worse. We have very little cash on hand and available to meet our bills. We are much worse than the industry average. Our cash flow conversion cycle, it has decreased, which is good. That means our money's tied up for a shorter period of time, but we are still, what, 148 days? The industry only has cash tied up for 83 days, so we are worse than the industry average. Operating cash flows. Let's go ahead and take a look at our operating cash flows. They've gone from negative 42,000 to negative 41,000. Not much change there, and we don't have any industry comparison. But in terms of how we would evaluate it, we would say we're pretty weak. Overall assessment of liquidity. It's kind of a judgment call, but certainly we've got absolutely abysmal operating cash flows. All of our measures of liquidity are worse than the industry average. In general, most of them are getting better, with the exception of what? The amount of cash we have on hand. I would give it an improving, but still very weak. Now, the next thing we'd have to do, of course, is translate these evaluations into a written format. First thing, please start off with your overall assessment. Tell me whether liquidity is improving or getting worse, and do we have some liquidity problems? And LA here, despite improving current and quick ratios, it has some serious liquidity problems. It has dangerously levels of cash on hand and negative operating cash. It's using basically a short-term line of credit, certainly in the most recent year, to fund our operating activities. In the most recent year, we drew $56 million on our line of credit. Talk about our other ratios. Our current ratio gives some numbers and industry comparisons. Again, day sale in cash, numbers and industry comparisons. Probably should put something in there about operating cash flows, the fact that they were negative. And then, again, talk about where the cash has come from. And one of the things we're going to find is LA Gear is probably going to need to slow its sales growth a little bit, because it's this rapid sales growth that's causing an increase in our inventories and our receivables. In other words, to support our higher level of sales, we need more inventory. As a result of higher levels of sales, we're going to have more in the way of accounts receivable. And if we look at our cash flow statement, we can see this buildup of inventory and receivables are our primary drains on our cash. Finally, some recommendations for improvement. Please note on your exam, I ask you to identify both strengths and weaknesses and make recommendations. So don't forget to identify some of your strengths and weaknesses. LA Gear needs to slow its sales growth and improve on improving its profitability and cash flows. Typically, our rapid sales growth, accompanied by falling gross profit margins, means we might be competing for customers on the basis of price. So if we were to slow our sales growth, we don't want to purposely slow our sales growth, but if we were to raise our prices, that would boost our gross profit margin and net profit margin. And if we spent less money on SG&A, in other words, advertising, these things would hopefully improve our profitability. Also, by slowing our sales growth, we don't need to make the same continued investments in inventories and receivables, which would help boost our operating cash flows. So recommendation 1, consider slowing our sales growth. Next, our inventory and receivable turnovers are still slower than the industry. So we should try to improve our collections and improve our inventory turnovers. We need to hold on to more cash. And again, lowering our sales growth and improving our turnovers in those two areas would help us improve our cash flow, and we could hold more cash. Also, we should probably try to lengthen our payable period. Notice our creditors. Despite the fact that we have no cash, we're paying our bills in 13 days when the industry average is 59 and we used to be at 21. I suspect our vendors and suppliers are concerned about our liquidity, and they're not giving us a very long leash. They're saying, you can pay in very quick terms, or perhaps some of our suppliers are putting us even on a COD basis.